Imagine you're hiking with a friend and they accidentally trip and fall down a cliff. You go down that cliff and make sure that they're okay. However, you notice that they're unable to move their arm and they're bleeding profusely from their leg. What would you do in this situation? Although I pray none of us ever have to encounter this, it is important to be prepared so we know what to do no matter what life throws at us. Today we will learn some basic and potentially life-saving techniques when it comes to stopping bleeding, creating a splint, and securing that splint with a sling. Okay everyone, the first thing we're going to learn is how to deal with bleeding. We have three major types of bleeding: capillary, venous, and arterial bleeding. We're going to start with capillary bleeding, which is a small stream of blood or a little ooze that you might get from a cut or a scrape. So when we're treating even capillary bleeding, we want to put gloves on our hands to protect us from whatever diseases she might have. So the first thing you want to do, we're going to pretend that there's a cut on this part of her hand, okay? We're going to want to clean it off with antiseptic, and then you just apply the Band-Aid as normal. Now, you can also apply pressure if the bleeding is a little heavier, and that will help the wound heal overall. Band-Aid. The next thing we're going to learn how to do is deal with venous bleeding. Now, say Ashlyn here fell and hit a sharp rock on her arm. Her arm is bleeding pretty quickly, more than just a little cut or scrape, and we want to make sure that we stop the bleeding by applying pressure. So I'm going to take gauze and I'm going to apply pressure to her arm for 10 minutes, okay? Now after that 10 minutes, and you want to be firm, it needs to be firm pressure, but not so firm that it is severely hurting the patient, okay? Now after that 10 minutes, do not remove this bandage. Look on the outside of the bandage. If it is still wet and you can tell it is still bleeding, then you want to apply more gauze and continue to apply pressure, all right? Once you believe it has stopped bleeding for the most part, then you can apply an ACE wrap to hold that bandage in place. Okay, and then continue that around. And then you would take them to a medical professional to have it properly cleaned and stitched if needed. Okay. Now, the last type of bleeding we're going to consider is arterial bleeding. Arterial bleeding is very fast and almost pulses out of the body. It is a big blood vessel that comes almost directly from the heart, and the problem with arterial bleeding is it can cause people to bleed out pretty quickly. So it is important to apply a tourniquet if this happens to stop the bleeding. So I'm going to take my strong, non-stretchy fabric. We're going to pretend she's bleeding profusely from her wrist, okay? I'm going to tie it around the arm. Like so. And then I'm going to take my pen or rigid stick of some sort. I'm going to put it under the knot that I tied, and then I'm going to twist. Like so. All right, and then I would secure this pen in place with the remainder of the string, and then I would take them to see a medical professional as soon as possible. Now, you want to make this as tight as needed to stop this bleeding. Something very important to note is that this hurts. Tourniquets are painful, but because they're literally cutting off blood flow to a part of the body. However, it could save the patient's life. So it's important for them to know that it's going to be painful, but it is needed. Okay, so now we're going to talk about splinting. When we consider splinting, it's important to consider the rule of thirds. If you take a bone, say the bone of the lower arm, and split it into 3 parts, it matters where the break is as to where we want to splint. If the break is in the lower part of the arm, you also want to splint the wrist through the middle of the arm. If it's in the middle part of the arm, you just want to splint this entire bone. If it's in the upper end of the arm, you want to splint the elbow to the middle of the arm. It is best to splint more than needed than not enough. So if there was a break up here and you weren't sure exactly what to do, you could just splint the entire arm. That works as well. So when it comes to splinting, we're going to assume she has a splint or a break in the lower part of her arm. I'm going to take some sort of rigid material, what I have is a binder, and put her arm on it in the same position it was. If her wrist was bent in any way, we do not want to move it from that position. And you can, if they're conscious, you can have them help. Next, we're going to take some sort of bandage or something we have. I'll use an ace wrap, and we will put it around the splint. This is to secure the arm to the splint, not to reduce blood flow at all. Now, if you were using a bandage to secure the end of the splint, you could use a multiple safety pins. This one specifically has like a Velcro on it, so it will just stick to itself. Now, once you have a part of the body splinted, you want to support it. And the way we reduce blood flow is by creating a sling. So what you want to do is you want to put the arm without making sure you're not damaging the elbow or that the elbow is not impaired at all. If possible, which it is not always possible, you want to put the hand and wrist above the heart. And then when she is in this, we would secure it in some way with a sweatshirt or something else we have. By doing this, we'll reduce. The most important thing to consider when performing first aid is that we want to do no harm. We don't want to make an injury worse than it already is. So when it comes to splinting, we don't want to move the injury at all. We want to stabilize it exactly how we found it. Also, when it comes to moving a patient, if, say, their knee needed to be splinted and they can't walk, it's important to call for help. We don't want to try to carry someone multiple miles with a splinted knee. It's important to do the best for the patient, even if the best we can do is call for help. I hope through this video you learned some important first aid techniques on how to stop bleeding, splint an arm or a leg, and stabilize an injury with a sling. I pray that none of us ever have to be in this situation, but more than that, I pray that we are prepared if we ever find ourselves here. Thank you.